The rain hammered the roof of the town car with a rhythm that felt almost accusatory, each drop a small judgment against the leather interior and the woman seated in back. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, though he could feel her gaze burning into the rearview mirror every few seconds. She had been doing that since they pulled away from the airport terminal, studying him with the kind of attention people reserve for things they find distasteful but cannot look away from. Her name was Vivian Hargrove, and she wore her impatience like expensive perfume, invisible but impossible to ignore. The traffic on the interstate had slowed to a crawl, brake lights stretching into the distance like a river of blood, and Marcus knew this drive to the Grandmont Hotel was going to be longer than either of them wanted. If stories like this one resonate with you, if you've ever felt judged before anyone knew your name, then stay with me, because what unfolds next might change how you see the world. Vivian sighed, loud enough to make sure he heard it. How much longer? Her voice had that polished edge, the kind that comes from boarding schools and country clubs, from never having to raise it to be heard. Traffic's heavy, Mom. Maybe 40 minutes. Marcus kept his tone neutral, professional. He had been driving for Lux Executive Services for 3 months now, and he had learned that neutrality was a kind of armor. 40 minutes, she repeated it like an accusation. I have a meeting at 7. This is unacceptable. Marcus said nothing. The clock on the dashboard read 6:12. Even with the traffic, they would make it. He adjusted the air conditioning, felt the cool air wash over his face, and let the silence settle. Outside, the city sprawled in shades of grey and silver, buildings rising like gravestones against the storm clouds. He had grown up in this city, in the South Side neighborhoods, where the streetlights flickered and the grocery stores had bars on the windows, and he knew every corner of it, every vein and artery. But people like Vivian never saw that part. They moved through the city in bubbles of glass and steel, from airport to hotel to boardroom, never touching the ground. You do speak English, don't you? Vivian's question cut through the hum of the engine. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, a familiar ache that he had learned to breathe through. Yes, ma'am. Born and raised here. Well, that's something, I suppose. She went back to her phone, fingers tapping against the screen with the rapid precision of someone used to making things happen with a few keystrokes. Marcus caught her reflection in the mirror, the sharp line of her jaw, the blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, the diamond studs in her ears catching what little light filtered through the storm. She was maybe 40, maybe younger, age softened by money and skincare, and the kind of life where stress meant a delayed flight, not a disconnection notice. The traffic inched forward. Marcus merged into the right lane, smooth and unhurried. He had been a driver long enough to know that rushing only made things worse, that the city had its own rhythm, and fighting it was pointless. He had learned that lesson the hard way, years ago, when he thought speed and determination could overcome anything. But that was before. Before the collapse, before the betrayal, before he found himself starting over with nothing but a commercial driver's license and a decade of experience no one wanted to acknowledge. "Is this your full-time job?" Vivian asked suddenly, and there was something in her tone that made the question feel like an insult. "For now," Marcus said, and left it at that. She made a small sound, dismissive, and returned to her phone. Marcus wondered what she saw when she looked at him. Just the uniform, probably. Just the cap and the dark jacket and the hands on the wheel. Not the man who had once sat in boardrooms, not unlike the one she was heading to, who had built a company from the ground up, who had shaken hands with investors and signed contracts worth millions. Not the man who had lost it all when his business partner, his best friend since college, had emptied the accounts and disappeared, leaving Marcus with the debts and the lawsuits and the wreckage. That had been 2 years ago, 2 years of climbing back, one shift at a time, one fare at a time, rebuilding something he could not yet name. The rain eased slightly, and the traffic began to move. Marcus accelerated, the car gliding forward with the quiet power of German engineering. He had always appreciated good machinery, the way a well-made engine could respond to the smallest input, the way quality revealed itself in silence rather than noise. His own car, a 15-year-old sedan with 160,000 miles on it, sat in the employee parking lot at the dispatch center, reliable but worn. This town car, with its polished exterior and leather that still smelled new, was a reminder of what he used to have and what he was working to reclaim. "You enjoy this work?" Vivian's voice again, cutting through his thoughts. Marcus considered the question. "It's honest work." "That's not what I asked." He met her eyes in the mirror. "I've done worse." She held his gaze for a moment, something flickering across her face that might have been curiosity or might have been contempt. Then she looked away, out the window at the passing lights. "I'm sure you have," she murmured, and Marcus felt the judgment in those words like a cold hand on the back of his neck. They drove in silence for a while, the city unfolding around them in fragments, glass towers and construction sites and neighborhoods that shifted from affluent to struggling within the span of a few blocks. Marcus took the scenic route without announcing it, avoiding the congestion on the main highway, cutting through streets he knew by heart. He passed the corner where his father's barbershop used to stand before the rent got too high, past the library where he had spent his teenage years reading everything he could find about business and economics, and the men who had built empires from nothing. He had believed in those stories once, believed that hard work and intelligence and integrity were enough. He had learned otherwise. "And why are you going this way?" Vivian's voice was sharp, suspicious. "This doesn't look like the main route." "Avoiding the backup on 7th. This'll save us 10 minutes. "I didn't authorize a detour." Marcus kept his voice level. "No charge for the time, Mom. Just trying to get you there faster." She fell silent, but he could feel her tension, the way she gripped her phone a little tighter, the way her eyes tracked every turn. He understood. To her, he was a stranger, and this was an unfamiliar route. And the neighborhoods they were passing through now were not the sanitized spaces she was used to. The buildings here were older, brick and concrete, laundromats and corner stores with hand-painted signs, people on the sidewalks despite the rain, living their lives in the open because inside was too small or too hot or too full of people who needed the same space. This was his world, or had been, and he felt a strange pride in it even as he saw it through her eyes, saw the graffiti and the cracked pavement and the chain-link fences, saw all the things she would remember when she told this story later to her colleagues, about the driver who took her through the bad part of town. "How much longer now?" she asked, and her voice had changed, tightened. 15 minutes. We're making good time." She nodded, not looking at him, her attention fixed on her phone as if the device could protect her from where she was. Marcus felt a flicker of something that might have been pity or might have been anger. He could not decide which. What would you have felt, riding through a stranger's world, seeing it through the window of your own fear? Drop a comment below, because this question is about to become more complicated than either of them expected. They turned onto a wider street, newer construction, the transition from old neighborhood to new development visible in the sudden appearance of coffee shops and boutiques with minimalist names. Marcus pulled into the circular drive of the Grandmont Hotel, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that reflected the storm clouds in its facade. A valet in a burgundy vest hurried forward with an umbrella. Marcus put the car in park and stepped out, moving quickly to open Vivian's door before the valet could reach it. She emerged without looking at him, already focused on the lobby entrance, on the next item in her schedule. "Thank you," she said, the words automatic, meaningless. Marcus nodded. "I have a good evening, Mom." She walked away, heels clicking on the wet pavement, and did not look back. The valet handed Marcus a ticket for the car, and Marcus noticed the way the young man's eyes lingered on him, uncertain, as if trying to place him. Marcus knew that look. It was the look of someone who sensed something did not quite fit, who saw the uniform but noticed something else beneath it, something that did not match the expected script. "You driving for Lux?" the valet asked. "Tonight?" "Yeah, long shift." "Always?" Marcus smiled, brief and tired, and got back in the car. He had 3 more pickups scheduled before midnight, and then he would go home to his studio apartment in a building that had once been a factory, where the radiators clanged and the neighbors argued through the thin walls, and he lay awake planning his next move, always his next move, because standing still meant falling behind, and he had fallen far enough. He pulled away from the hotel, merging back into traffic, and his phone buzzed with a new dispatch: airport run, pick up in 20 minutes. He accepted it and changed lanes, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar streets. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shining, reflecting the neon signs and traffic signals in smeared colors. Marcus drove in silence, the radio off, his thoughts turning over the interaction with Vivian Hargrove like a puzzle he could not quite solve. She had looked at him and seen nothing, or worse, she had seen only what she expected to see, and in that moment he had felt the old anger rise up, the anger he had learned to bury because anger solved nothing and changed nothing, and only made the world smaller. But beneath the anger was something else. Something he had been feeling more and more lately, a sense that this was not the end of his story, that the pieces were moving in ways he could not yet see. He had learned patience in the last 2 years, learned that some victories took time, that some kinds of success could not be rushed. He had also learned that the universe had a sense of irony, and that people like Vivian Hargrove, people who moved through the world with such certainty about their place in it, were often the most fragile when that certainty was challenged. The airport came into view, the terminals bright against the darkening sky. Marcus pulled into the arrival lane, watching the stream of travelers emerging from the automatic doors, pulling suitcases and checking phones and searching for their rides. His passenger was a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit, looking exhausted and relieved to see the Lux placard Marcus held up. They exchanged pleasantries, loaded the luggage, and Marcus drove him to a hotel on the north side, near the financial district, where the buildings were taller and the streets cleaner, and the homeless people were moved along before they could become a visible problem. "You live in the city?" the man asked, making conversation. All my life. Must be nice, knowing it so well," Marcus smiled. "And it has its moments." They talked a little about the weather, about the traffic, about nothing important, and Marcus dropped him off and collected the next fare, and then the next, the night passing in a rhythm of pickups and drop-offs, conversations that never went deeper than pleasantries, people who entered his car and left it without ever really seeing him. He'd become used to this, the invisibility of service work, the way people looked through him as if he were just another part of the machinery, like the seatbelts or the air conditioning. But tonight, after Vivian Hargrove, the invisibility felt heavier, more pointed, and he found himself wondering what it would take to be seen again, really seen, not as a driver or a servant or a convenience, but as a man with his own story and his own scars and his own plans for the future. It was nearly midnight when he returned to the dispatch center, parked the town car, and walked to his own vehicle. The lot was mostly empty, just a few other drivers finishing their shifts, exchanging tired nods as they headed home. Marcus sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the silence settle around him. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer, brief and to the point. "Motion filed, hearing set for next month. Stay patient." Marcus read it twice, then put the phone away. The lawsuit was moving forward slowly, the legal process grinding along with all the speed of continental drift. He was suing his former partner, trying to recover what had been stolen. But the odds were not good, and the costs were mounting. And some days he wondered if it was worth it. If justice was just another word for throwing good money after bad. He started the car and drove home through the empty streets, the city quiet now, most people asleep or pretending to be. He parked in the lot behind his building, climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment, and unlocked the door to the small space he'd been living in for 18 months. 1 room, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that never got quite hot enough. He'd furnished it with second-hand pieces, a couch from a thrift store, a table from a yard sale, everything temporary, everything waiting for the next chapter to begin. He made a sandwich, ate it standing at the counter, and went to bed without turning on the television. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of boardrooms and handshakes and his father's barbershop, the smell of shaving cream and aftershave and the sound of men laughing, the sound of a world where respect was earned and given freely, where a man's word meant something. He woke to sunlight filtering through the thin curtains and the sound of someone shouting in the hallway. Another day. He showered, dressed, made coffee in the cheap machine that sputtered and hissed, and checked his phone. 3 messages from dispatch asking if he could cover an extra shift. He replied yes, because he always replied yes, because every fare was another step toward rebuilding what had been taken from him. He drove to the dispatch center, picked up his assigned vehicle, and started the day. The morning was busy, business travelers and tourists, people in a hurry and people with nowhere to be, all of them strangers who became briefly familiar and then disappeared. Marcus drove them efficiently, professionally, collecting fares and tips and the occasional compliment about his driving. By early afternoon he was tired, the kind of tired that settles into the bones and makes everything feel heavier. He stopped for lunch at a diner he liked, a place with vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone honey and coffee that was always fresh. He sat at the counter, ordered a burger, and watched the television mounted in the corner, the news cycling through stories about politics and weather, and a charity gala happening that evening at the Grandmont Hotel. Marcus paid attention when the Grandmont appeared on screen. The reporter was talking about the annual gala for the Children's Healthcare Foundation, a major fundraiser that drew the city's elite, corporate sponsors and philanthropists and politicians, all gathered to write checks and take photos and feel good about themselves. The camera panned across the preparations, the red carpet being rolled out, the ice sculptures being positioned, and then it cut to an interview with one of the organizers, a woman in her 50s with perfect hair and a practiced smile. She talked about the importance of the cause, about the children they were helping, about the generosity of the donors, and Marcus felt the familiar disconnect between the words and the reality, the way charity could become another form of performance, another way for the wealthy to congratulate themselves. He finished his lunch, paid, and left. The afternoon shift was lighter, just 2 airport runs and a downtown drop-off, and by 6 he was parked outside a luxury apartment building, waiting for his next passenger. The address was in the system, a pickup for the gala, and Marcus recognized the building as one of the most expensive in the city, the kind of place where the doorman wore white gloves, and the lobby had a chandelier that probably cost more than his entire year's salary. He waited, engine idling, watching people come and go, and then his passenger emerged. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, wearing a dark blue gown that looked simple until you noticed the way it moved, the way the fabric caught the light. She had brown skin and natural hair, pulled back in an elegant twist, and she walked with the kind of confidence that did not need to announce itself. Marcus got out, opened the door, and she smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said, and slid into the back seat. Marcus closed the door, got back behind the wheel, and pulled into traffic. "Grandmont Hotel, correct?" "Yes, please." The gala. She was looking at her phone, but not with the same intensity as Vivian Hargrove, not as if the device were a shield. "Have you been driving long?" "Few months with this company." "Do you like it?" Marcus glanced at her in the mirror. "It pays the bills." She smiled again, understanding in the expression. "I hear that. I'm a resident at City General. Same philosophy. Do the work, pay the loans, hope there's something left at the end." They talked a little. Easy conversation about the city and the weather and the challenges of making it through the day. Her name was Alicia, and she was attending the gala as a representative of the pediatric unit, there to speak briefly about the impact of the foundation's grants. She seemed nervous in the way people get when they have to perform in front of strangers, and Marcus found himself offering encouragement, telling her she would do fine, that speaking from the heart was always enough. "Thanks," she said as they pulled up to the hotel. "I needed that. Good luck tonight." She paid, added a generous tip, and got out. Marcus watched her disappear into the flow of gala attendees, all of them dressed in their finest, all of them moving toward the bright lights and music spilling out from the ballroom. He sat there for a moment, feeling the contrast between that world and his own, and then his phone buzzed with another pickup. He put the car in gear and drove away, back to the work that never stopped, the endless cycle of pickups and drop-offs, of being everywhere and nowhere, seen and unseen. It was past 9 when he got the call. Not a dispatch, but a direct call from his lawyer, which was unusual. Marcus pulled over, parked, and answered. "Marcus, you sitting down? What happened?" "Your former partner, James, he was arrested this afternoon. The feds got him. Wire fraud, embezzlement, the whole thing. They've been building a case for months." Marcus felt his heart kick against his ribs. "What does that mean for me?" "It means we have leverage now. It means the assets he stole. There's a path to recovery. It means you might actually get something back." Marcus closed his eyes, let the words settle. 2 years of grinding through each day, of rebuilding from nothing, of fighting the bitterness and the anger and the sense of betrayal that had threatened to consume him. And now, finally, a crack in the wall, a chance at something resembling justice. "There's more," his lawyer said. "The feds want to talk to you. You were one of the first victims, and your testimony could help them nail him. They're offering full cooperation in the asset recovery." "When?" "Soon. I'll set it up. But Marcus, this is good. This is really good." They talked for a few more minutes, working through the details, and then Marcus hung up and sat in the silence of the car, trying to process what had just happened. He felt too much and too little all at once. Relief and vindication, and a strange, hollow sense that even if he got the money back, even if James went to prison, it would not undo the last 2 years, would not give him back the time or the trust or the version of himself he had been before the betrayal. But it was something. It was a door opening. He started the car and drove, not back to dispatch, but toward the Grandmont Hotel. He was not scheduled for any more pickups there, but he felt pulled toward it, toward the light and the noise and the place where people gathered to celebrate their own generosity. He parked in the lot reserved for service vehicles and sat watching the entrance, the flow of guests still arriving, fashionably late, eager to be seen. The rain had started again, light and persistent, blurring the lights into halos of color. Marcus thought about Vivian Hargrove, wondered if she was inside, attending the gala, networking and making connections and moving through that world with the same certainty she had shown in the car. He thought about what she had seen when she looked at him and what she had missed. He thought about all the other passengers who had looked at him the same way, who had reduced him to a uniform and a function, never wondering about the man beneath. And he thought about the path that had brought him here, to this parking lot in the rain, waiting for nothing in particular, caught between the life he had lost and the life he was building. His phone buzzed. A text from dispatch. "Need coverage for VIP pickup at Grandmont, 11 p.m. Guest requesting you specifically. Name, Hargrove. Accept." Marcus stared at the message. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony after all. He typed back a single word, "accepted." He had 2 hours. He used them to drive to his apartment, change into a fresh shirt, make sure the car was spotless. He ate a quick dinner, more out of necessity than hunger, and then drove back to the Grandmont, arriving 15 minutes early. The gala was in full swing, music drifting out into the night, laughter and the clink of glasses, all the sounds of people enjoying themselves at someone else's expense. Marcus waited in the designated area, watching the valets move with choreographed efficiency, and at 11 sharp his phone buzzed. Passenger ready. He pulled up to the entrance. Vivian Hargrove emerged, still in the same outfit from the night before, looking slightly less composed, slightly more human. She saw the car, saw him behind the wheel, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. She got in without a word. "Good evening, ma'am," Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral. "Where to?" "The airport, and please take the fastest route. I don't have time for shortcuts tonight." Marcus nodded and pulled away from the hotel. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and reflective. He drove in silence, taking the main highway, staying in the fast lane, efficient and professional. Vivian was on her phone again, typing rapidly, her energy different tonight, more frantic, less controlled. "Did you enjoy the gala?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. "It was fine. These things are always the same." She did not look up from her phone. "Raise a lot of money." "Enough." She paused, then added, "Why do you ask?" "Just making conversation." She finally looked up, met his eyes in the mirror. "You're the same driver from yesterday." "Yes, ma'am." "You requested me specifically." Marcus felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "Actually, ma'am, you requested me?" She frowned, checked her phone, and her expression changed as she read something on the screen. There must be some mistake. "No mistake. Dispatch said you asked for the driver from yesterday." Vivian looked confused, then irritated. "I didn't request anyone. My assistant must have—" She trailed off, returned to her phone, fingers moving quickly. Marcus watched her in the mirror, saw the way her certainty was beginning to crack, the way confusion was settling in. He knew that feeling. He had lived it for 2 years. They drove in silence for a while, the highway stretching out before them, relatively empty at this hour. The city lights fell away behind them, replaced by the darker spaces between exits, the industrial parks and office complexes silent and dark. Marcus kept the speed steady, 70 in a 65 zone, fast enough to feel purposeful, slow enough to be safe. "Can I ask you something?" Vivian's voice was quieter now, less sharp. "Of course. Yesterday, you said you'd done worse work. What did you mean?" Marcus considered his answer. "I used to run my own company. Lost it all when my partner stole everything and disappeared. Had to start over. This job, driving, it's not worse, it's just different." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry. That must have been difficult." "It was. Still is. Some days." "Why didn't you mention it yesterday, when I asked about your work? Would it have mattered?" Marcus kept his tone light, curious rather than accusatory. Vivian did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer. "Probably not. I was in a mood. I'm always in a mood when I travel. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth." Marcus nodded. "And we all have our days." "That's generous of you." They continued toward the airport, the silence between them more comfortable now, less weighted. Marcus thought about what his lawyer had told him, about James's arrest, about the possibility of recovery. He thought about the path that had brought him here, driving this car, having this conversation, and he realized that none of it had been wasted, that even the hardest parts had taught him something about patience and resilience and the strange ways the world worked itself out. "I need to tell you something," Vivian said suddenly. "I looked you up. After yesterday, I was curious about the driver who took me through those neighborhoods, and I found some old articles about your company, about what happened to you." Marcus felt his hands tighten on the wheel. "Why?" "I don't know. Curiosity. Guilt. Maybe. I was rude to you, and I felt bad about it. So I searched your name on the Dispatch app, found your last name, and went down a rabbit hole." She paused. "You built something impressive, and it was stolen from you. That's not fair." "No, it's not. But fairness is a luxury." "Is that what you really believe?" Marcus thought about it. "I'm starting to believe that fairness is something you have to fight for. It doesn't just happen." Vivian was quiet. Then she said, "I run a venture capital firm. We invest in startups, help them grow. It's competitive, cutthroat sometimes. I've seen a lot of people get screwed over, lose everything. It's part of the game. But hearing your story, I don't know, it feels different." "Why?" "Because you're still fighting. Most people would have given up." Marcus smiled, a real smile this time. "I thought about it, every day for a while. But giving up felt like letting him win twice." They reached the airport, and Marcus pulled into the departure lane. He put the car in park, got out, and opened Vivian's door. She stepped out, and for the first time, she really looked at him, not as a driver or a convenience, but as a person. She reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and handed it to him. "Call me next week. I want to hear more about your company, what you're planning next. We might be able to help." Marcus took the card, read the embossed letters. Vivian Hargrove, managing partner, Hargrove Capital. He looked up at her, trying to read her expression, trying to see if this was genuine or just another performance. "I'm serious," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "I was wrong about you. I'd like a chance to make it right." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll call." "Good." She picked up her bag, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About yesterday, about assuming things. It's a bad habit. We all have those." She smiled, brief and genuine, and walked toward the terminal. Marcus watched her go, then got back in the car. He sat there for a moment, looking at the business card, feeling the weight of possibility in his hand. He thought about his lawyer's call, about James's arrest, about the gala and the people inside who wrote checks and felt good about themselves, and about Alicia, the resident who was just trying to pay her loans and do good work. He thought about all the threads that had led to this moment, sitting in an airport departure lane, with a business card in his hand, and a future that suddenly looked different than it had yesterday. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. "It's me. Something just happened. I need to tell you about it." The next week moved quickly. Marcus met with the federal agents, gave his testimony, provided documents and emails and everything he had saved from the collapse. They told him the case was strong, that James had been sloppy, arrogant, that he had left a trail wide enough to drive a truck through. They told him asset recovery would take time, but that it was likely he would get most of it back, maybe even more once damages were calculated. Marcus listened, answered their questions, and felt something loosen in his chest, some knot he had been carrying for 2 years without realizing how much it weighed. He called Vivian Hargrove on Thursday. She answered on the second ring, remembered him immediately, and invited him to her office the following Monday. Marcus said yes, hung up, and spent the weekend preparing, pulling together the business plan he had been working on in the margins of his life, the idea that had been growing slowly, quietly, while he drove strangers through the city. It was a new concept, a platform that connected service workers with opportunities for advancement, training programs and microloans and mentorship, a way to help people like him rebuild after catastrophe. He had sketched it out on napkins and in notebooks, refined it in the early morning hours before his shifts, and now, suddenly, he had a chance to pitch it to someone who might actually be able to help. Monday came. Marcus wore his best suit, the one he had saved from the old days, and drove to Hargrove Capital's office in the financial district. The building was glass and steel, modern and imposing, and the lobby had the kind of quiet that money bought, the kind where even footsteps were muffled. He took the elevator to the 14th floor, gave his name to the receptionist, and waited in a sitting area with leather chairs and art on the walls that looked expensive, because it was... Vivian appeared after 10 minutes, wearing a different suit than the one he had seen her in, but the same expression of focused intensity. She shook his hand, her grip firm, and led him to a conference room with a view of the city spreading out below them. They sat across from each other, and for a moment, Marcus felt the old nervousness return, the fear that he would not be enough, that his idea would sound foolish when spoken out loud. Then he remembered the last 2 years, remembered driving through the rain and being invisible and fighting his way back from nothing, and the nervousness settled into something steadier. "Tell me about your idea," Vivian said, and Marcus began to talk. He talked for 20 minutes, explaining the problem and the solution, the market and the model, the social impact and the financial returns. He showed her the projections he had made, the partnerships he had already started to build, the pilot program he wanted to launch. Vivian listened without interrupting, taking notes, asking questions that were sharp and pointed but not dismissive. When he finished, she sat back and looked at him for a long moment. "This is good," she said finally. "Really good. It's exactly the kind of thing we like to support. Profit with purpose." Marcus felt his heart kick. "So you're interested?" "I am. But I need to run it by my partners. Do some due diligence. Give me 2 weeks. If everything checks out, we'll talk terms." "Thank you. I mean it." Vivian smiled. "Don't thank me yet. We're hard negotiators. I'd expect nothing less." They talked for a few more minutes about next steps and timelines, and then Vivian walked him back to the elevator. As they waited for the doors to open, she said, "I've been thinking about that night, the ride from the airport. I almost didn't look you up. I almost just let it go." "Why did you?" "Because you weren't what I expected, and that bothered me. It made me realize how often I do that, make assumptions, put people in boxes. It's lazy thinking." The elevator arrived. Marcus stepped inside, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I think most people do it. The difference is whether you're willing to look again." Vivian nodded. "I'll remember that." The doors closed, and Marcus rode down to the lobby, walked out into the bright afternoon, and called his lawyer. "It's happening," he said. "It's really happening." They talked briefly about next steps, about the continuing federal case, about the potential timeline for asset recovery, and when Marcus hung up, he stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting himself feel the full weight of what was unfolding. It was not revenge. It was not even justice. Not really. It was something more complicated, more human, a second chance that he had earned through patience and persistence and the refusal to let bitterness define him. He drove back to the dispatch center, turned in the town car, and picked up his own vehicle. He had one more shift scheduled, an evening airport run, and he took it because he needed to, because the bills still needed paying and the future was not yet secure. But as he drove through the familiar streets, past the neighborhoods that had shaped him and the buildings that held his history, he felt different, lighter, as if something that had been pressing down on him for 2 years had finally lifted. His passenger that evening was an older man, a professor returning from a conference, and they talked about education and opportunity and the ways the world was changing. The professor asked Marcus what he did besides driving, and Marcus told him about the business he was building, the idea that was taking shape, and the professor listened with genuine interest, asked good questions, and when they arrived at his destination, he shook Marcus's hand and said, "Young man, I hope you know how rare it is to meet someone who sees problems as opportunities. Whatever you're building, the world needs more of it." Marcus drove home that night with those words echoing in his mind. The professor's comment had touched something deeper than encouragement. It had reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place, not just to rebuild what he had lost, but to create something better, something that could help others avoid the fall he had experienced. 2 weeks later, Vivian called with the news he had been hoping for. Hargrove Capital wanted to invest. Not just money, but expertise, connections, and credibility. The terms were fair, better than fair, and Marcus found himself sitting in the same conference room where he had pitched his idea, this time signing documents that would change everything. As he wrote his name on the final page, he thought about the night in the rain when Vivian had looked at him and seen nothing, and how that moment of invisibility had somehow led to this moment of recognition. The federal case against James concluded 6 months later with a guilty plea and a restitution order that recovered 80% of what had been stolen. Marcus used the money not to return to his old life, but to fund the expansion of his new venture, which had grown beyond his original vision into something that was helping thousands of service workers across 3 states find pathways to better opportunities. On a rainy Thursday evening, exactly 1 year after his first encounter with Vivian Hargrove, Marcus found himself back at the Grandmont Hotel, not as a driver, but as a guest speaker at another charity gala. This one focused on workforce development and economic opportunity. He stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of investors and philanthropists and community leaders, and he told them a story about a night when he was invisible and how that invisibility had taught him to see others more clearly. The most powerful investments we can make, he said, are not in ideas or technologies or market opportunities. They're in people who have been overlooked, underestimated, written off, because those people, when given a real chance, don't just succeed, they transform entire communities. In the audience, Vivian Hargrove smiled and applauded, and Marcus caught her eye and nodded, a small acknowledgement of the journey they had both taken from that first uncomfortable ride through the rain. Later, at the reception, she approached him with someone in tow, a young woman who looked nervous and determined in equal measure. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen. She's a nursing assistant who has an idea for improving patient care coordination." "I thought you two should talk." Marcus shook Sarah's hand and saw in her eyes the same mixture of hope and fear he had carried for so long. "Tell me about your idea," he said, and as she began to speak, he felt the circle completing itself. The way help given freely always found its way back, transformed and multiplied. The rain that had started during his speech continued through the evening, drumming against the hotel windows with the same rhythm that had marked the beginning of this story. But now, instead of sounding accusatory, it sounded like applause, like the universe acknowledging that sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simple decision to see each other as human beings worthy of respect, dignity, and a second chance. Marcus drove home that night in his own car, a modest sedan that he had chosen not because he couldn't afford better, but because it reminded him of where he had been and how far he had traveled. The city looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had learned to see it through different eyes, to recognize the potential hidden in every corner, every neighborhood, every person just trying to make it through another day. If this story has reminded you that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, that every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are rather than what they appear to be, then share it with someone who needs that reminder. Because somewhere tonight, in a car or a restaurant or an office building, someone is invisible who shouldn't be. Someone has a story worth hearing. Someone is one conversation away from changing not just their own life, but the lives of everyone they touch. The question isn't whether these people exist. The question is whether we have the courage to look beyond our assumptions and see them